Hey everyone, Daniel Marchana here with XDA TV, and today I am bringing you a camera comparison shootout between the Galaxy S9 and the LG V40. Now you're probably wondering why I chose these two flagships to do a comparison against, especially when the Galaxy S10 and the LG V50 are right around the corner. The reason is simple. Not everyone has the opportunity to purchase the top tier flagship every year, and sometimes last year's flagships are good enough for most people. So which device should you choose? Last year's Samsung or last year's king of LG, the V40? Today, we find out. Alright, so now we're using the rear cameras here on the Galaxy S9 and the LG V40. Again, we're using the standard camera, so we're not using the wide angle on the LG V40.
As we can see here with the 4K 60 footage, the LG V40 looks to be having a big problem with handling dynamic range. Over the middle of the shot, you can see there's a lot of clearly overexposed pieces of image in the shot. The grass is well exposed, but the grass is also well exposed on the Galaxy S9 shot as well. Now, if you look at the building here on the left-hand side, the truer colors are found on the Galaxy S9, but the LG V40 does a pretty respectable job as well. So looking at the palm branches here, you can see how over-sharpening and that weird dynamic range issue is affecting the LG V40. It looks like it's crushing the shadows while also overexposing the highlights. I'm not a huge fan of the way that it looks, but it's not terrible either. The image on the LG V40 is also quite oversaturated. You can see a really deep, almost yellow-green to almost everything that's in the shot. Now in this clip, I'm walking up to this pillar that's here to do a focusing test between the two devices, and I notice something interesting happens. Now watch quickly, and you'll actually see that the LG V40 has almost a hiccup while it tries to focus on the farther out scene of the buildings and stuff in the background. I'm not 100% sure what's causing that to happen, but it is fairly reproducible in these shots. It doesn't happen every time, but it does happen a considerable number of times. Like I mentioned before, though, the Galaxy S9 just looks to be doing a better job all around with the exposure on the shot. But again, the V40 does look really good as well. I really don't have a whole lot of complaints for how the V40 looks. You can really see here where this sidewalk is overexposed on the LG V40. I wish it just did a better job preserving those highlights and those lowlights throughout the image, instead of being too far to one side or too far to the other side. Now we're looking at image stabilization here as well. Now keep in mind, in the 4K 60 modes, that image stabilization is pretty much relegated just to optical image stabilization, and I think both devices do a pretty respectable job. I do notice there is a significant amount of warping though on the LG V40 at the edges of the frame. Now I'm going to start jogging here in this clip, and I'm going to go back to the camera audio so you can hear it, and you can also see the warping that's occurring here on the LG V40.
Go into a shadier area here and see how they do.
Now, as we come into this area under the trees, you can see the Galaxy S9 is doing a fantastic job of exposing both the highlights and the lowlights in this shaded but bright background area. I just think that it does a better job at handling the entire scene, whereas the LG V40 does do some pretty magnificent things if you're looking strictly for cinematography and have the ability to place your shots and you know exactly what you're going to shoot. The S9 just seems to be more of a reliable all-arounder compared to the V40 in these tests.
Alright, so I have switched both cameras to 1080p at 30 frames per second to get a good, accurate representation of how they do in their most optimal situation and frame rate, where they're allowed to do their HDR processing to the video. And this is not the HDR like Sony has, but just the wider contrast and color range. So both of those have those enabled. I did turn off the tracking autofocus on the Galaxy S9. It didn't allow me to turn on video stabilization with that mode enabled. And I just didn't think it was fair to have it on one phone and not on the other. So I switched that off and switched on the video stabilization, so it's both optical and digital video stabilization. Now here in 1080, it does look like the LG V40, at least on the screen, is oversaturating things quite a bit. But it does look like that contrast issue and that dynamic range issue that I mentioned before, it does look like it's been pretty much rectified here, with the LG taking a brighter image than the S9 has, but not sacrificing on those high ends.
So here's where I test jogging and stabilization in this mode. The LG V40 actually does a really poor job at stabilization. There's a lot of jerking and screen tearing, and it looks like frame dropping while it's running, as well as warping around the edges, whereas the Galaxy S9 does a great job keeping things fairly buttery smooth considering the difficult circumstances. Now you can see here, compared to the 4K footage, the LG V40 is doing a significantly better job in this dark and bright area, exposing the entire image a little bit better. It looks like the extra bandwidth allows them to properly process the video in order to really give you great dynamic range.
We're going to go ahead and listen to the audio of this fountain right here and see which device picks this up more accurately. Alright, so here we're testing the manual video mode on the LG V40. The Samsung Galaxy S9 is still in its auto mode, as it does not currently offer any kind of a manual video mode. For settings on the LG V40, I have got full HD at 30 frames per second matched between both devices, and the bitrate is set to high on the LG V40, so it's approximately 24 megabits per second. The hi-fi audio is also enabled on the LG V40, but I haven't changed any of the exposure settings or white balance. I want to see what it does in manual mode, giving me more options, but also still auto.
So here we are testing pretty much the maximum the LG V40 can do. This is Pro Mode 4K 60 frames per second at 80 megabits per second. This is an astronomical recording rate, and to see this 4K footage raw on my computer, there is so much detail in this shot that you just lose when you upload to YouTube. It really is beautiful footage and is pretty much untouched by anything I've seen from other devices, especially in this form factor and price.
So again, the hi-fi audio is enabled here, and we're going to go ahead and toggle a cool setting with that hi-fi. We've got our wind noise filter on now, since it is kind of windy out here. I'm interested to see what exactly this sounds like. I'm just going to walk around here from a couple of different angles and let the wind really attack this device, see if there's any kinds of compression.
Now, I do wish I was standing still more in this shot to really soak in the level of detail that this phone can bring out, because the optical image stabilization really doesn't do a great job. It does still have a little bit of an issue with exposure, but to be honest, the amount of detail that's coming into the shot right here and the bit rate, it just looks phenomenal on a 4K television or a 4K computer monitor.
Alright everybody, so here we're testing the standard front cameras on the LG V40 and the Galaxy S9. Now you can see that the crop is actually really tight, especially when you're in landscape mode. If you're in portrait mode, you know, it definitely is considerably better for doing selfies and stuff like that. But currently my rig isn't capable of handling portrait mode, so I'll have to make some modifications to go ahead and get that changed around. Now they both do also have their image stabilization on, so you are getting cropped shots as well, and they're both recording at 1080p. You can record at QHD with the front camera on these phones, but I think most people are going to leave it to 1080p. That's what I recommend as well, to ensure that you keep your stabilization, any HDR effects and stuff like that. I am switching between the audio of the two phones so you can kind of get a good representation of what each phone sounds like. So it does look like there's some excessive sharpening going on with the LG V40, at least from what I'm seeing on the representation on the screen, compared to the Samsung, which looks actually a little bit soft, but in my personal opinion, it looks a little bit better. I have turned off all video modes and beauty modes and effects and stuff like that to go ahead and get the best representation of what I feel these sensors are capable of, not what the software is tuned for. And this is the LG V40 wide-angle sensor versus the Samsung Galaxy S9 standard sensor. And you can see I've got a lot more space above my head for me to go ahead and hold the cameras. Again, in portrait mode, it's much easier to keep yourself in frame. So you can see here, actually, it looks like the wide-angle sensor is having a difficult time adjusting to the change in dynamic range there. Go ahead and switch it back this way and then switch back. Looks like, yeah, it's still having some trouble there switching the dynamic range and adjusting and compensating for the brighter background. The Samsung definitely looks like it's blowing out the background considerably more. But you know, when I'm shooting a selfie shooter, I want it to be focused on my face and compensate for my face, not what's going on behind me. And it looks like the Samsung's doing a little bit better job at that particular task.
So here we're doing a photo comparison between the two devices. I think they both do an outstanding job in this particular shot. Now, the LG V40 does look a little bit sharper because of that increased sharpness that they're applying in post, whereas the Samsung looks softer, but the colors are blown out a little bit too far in the LG V40. This shot here of the water feature and the statue, you do see some compression going on with the dynamic range on the LG V40 as well as over sharpening in the shot, but they both do a pretty good job. With these red flowers, you notice that the LG V40 is pushing the colors just a little bit too far in both the yellow and the reds, and I feel the Samsung did a better job here. In this shot of underneath the trees, you notice the shot has kind of a yellow cast when you're looking at the grass. I also noticed that the Samsung appears to have a little bit more depth to the shot, and that's probably due to the f1.5 aperture that the LG V40 is locked to, whereas the Samsung will default to f2.4 in most scenarios, giving you a crisper shot even on these small sensors. Now looking at these shots here, you can really see how limited the wide-angle sensor is. There are occasions like the first image where the wide-angle sensor looks amazing, but there are also shots like this where the wide-angle sensor just doesn't do it. These wide-angle lenses on both the front and the back are very situational. They're not something you're going to want to be using all the time. They can get great shots, but you're not always guaranteed a great shot like you might be from your primary sensors. Flipping over to the selfie camera, one thing that I do notice between the two is the softer Samsung and the over-sharpened LG V40. This really comes down to preference, as it depends on what you like to see in your selfies. Now personally, I would rather be between the two here, but if I was forced to choose, I think I would end up going with the Galaxy S9 because I think that it just is a better representation. I just can't stand the over-sharpening that's going on my beard, on my jacket, my hair, and the objects behind. Now moving into low light shots, both cameras went to their f1.5 for this shot. The LG V40 is locked there and the Samsung went down to that because it detected a low light. Now across the board, the Samsung is the better shot. Its white balance is more accurate to the situation and almost all levels of detail are more accurate. The LG V40 has a weird softening going on in the bookmark above the letter E and the light switch. I believe it's due to trying to cancel out some noise that was in the image, but it just ends up leading to a less desirable shot. The colors are also quite a bit off on this shot as well. The Samsung, on the other hand, did a great job handling pretty much this really rough situation perfectly. Now looking at this situation here, this one I'd probably call a draw. Both cameras do a pretty great job. I would probably say the LG V40 handled the scene more accurate to what was representative there, but there is some over-sharpening going on in the little lighthouse figure on the left and the branches in the left as well. The colors are a little bit better on the LG V40, and the exposure on the Samsung Galaxy S9 is a little bit high over on the right-hand side of the image. I picked this shot because there's a lot of colors, shadows, and detail, and neither camera really impressed me. Now the Galaxy S9 does a better job overall on the image, but it really messes up with some weird artifacts going on there on the back of the OnePlus 6. The LG V40, on the other hand, did a terrible job with shadows, and it almost looks like it didn't shoot it in HDR, even though the HDR settings are enabled. Again, I shot these in pure auto mode, so I don't really know exactly what the camera was doing. If I had to choose, I would take the Galaxy S9, even with that defect there on the back of the phone. And here comes our final shot for the comparison of low light. I think that the Galaxy S9 does a better job here in this shot. There's some weird softness going on in the background and right to the left and the right of the main subject of the shot on the LG V40. One thing I do like about the LG V40 in this shot is the bokeh on the lights on the little branches in the back look fantastic and look like something you're more expecting out of your DSLR than you are out of your camera phone. I don't think you'd be disappointed with either of these shots from either of these phones, and again, this is another one I'd probably go ahead and call a draw. So which phone should you purchase with your hard-earned money? Well, that's a difficult decision, but I think it comes down to the Galaxy S9. I feel the Galaxy S9 is more capable in a lot of situations, and as far as pulling it out of your pocket and getting the best shot, the Galaxy S9 is handily going to beat the LG V40. That's not to say the LG V40 isn't excellent in some areas. It's like a Swiss Army knife. The LG V40 has a lot of options and a lot of tools to handle a lot of scenarios, but it's really not the best at any single situation. I feel if you want to pull your phone out of your pocket, you want to pull the S9 out of your pocket. If you really want to set up and place and get the most cinematic shot or the perfect shot tuned to exactly what you want, the LG V40 might just be the device for you. When it comes to standalone images, I'm really not impressed with the LG V40's processing. Things are over-softened, and in my experience and shots I couldn't include in this comparison, I've noticed that the white balance is just not accurate. Now, the reason I couldn't keep those shots in this comparison is because I didn't have a comparable shot with the S9. I've included a couple of them over the screen here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about, where the images just don't look right. And I took multiple images with the LG V40, and it wasn't until I went into the Pro mode that I was able to change the white balance and fix these issues. I think the LG V40 is most of the way there to being an outstanding camera, but it just doesn't quite nail the basics before moving on to some of the more advanced aspects of photography and cinematography. So if you've enjoyed this review, I definitely encourage you to subscribe to XDA TV and subscribe to my personal channel that's linked in the description. Be sure to hit the notification bell to get notified of every daily video we put out here on XDA, and leave this video a like if you've enjoyed it, as it really does help out the channel. Now, I've enjoyed doing this video comparison, and I look forward to doing more devices with the Galaxy S10 coming up here shortly. I thank you so much for checking out this video, and I'll see you in the next one.